Grace stood in front of the hallway mirror, her fingers delicately adjusting the strap of her bold red dress. In that reflective moment, her eyes gleamed with mischief, as if daring the world to catch on, and her reflection almost winked back at her. Without so much as a proper glance in my direction, she snatched her purse and tossed out words that would soon shatter everything I believed. "I'm off on a date. Try not to be too jealous." For a heartbeat, I wondered if I'd misheard her, thinking perhaps it was a playful quip, a tongue-in-cheek remark. But the way she shifted her weight and deliberately avoided locking eyes with me told a very different story. I clutched the edge of the kitchen counter, my mind swirling in disbelief. "Excuse me," I managed, forcing my voice to sound steadier than I felt. Grace sighed, her tone already steeped in impatience. "You heard me." With a twist of her hair and a dismissive flip over her shoulder, she continued, "I have plans tonight. Someone else is waiting." It was not just the words, it was the nonchalant delivery that made it sting. Standing there in the very dress I had chosen for her, as if announcing a casual rendezvous with another man, was utterly normal. That simple word, date, landed like a dull ache in my chest. I should have exploded, demanded answers. But instead I stood frozen, realizing how little I truly knew the woman before me. "Do you expect me to just accept this?" I tried to sound composed, drawing a slow, steady breath. Her cool smirk returned, but now it held a hint of frost. "I expect you to be an adult," she explained, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We've been together for years. Marriage gets boring. I just want to explore my options." A humorless laugh escaped me even as my heart pounded in my ears, but outwardly I managed to remain unnervingly calm. "So let me get this straight," I said evenly. "You're just seeing someone else, with no discussion or regard for what I might feel?" She merely shrugged, as if unveiling a universal truth. "You would have known eventually, so why hide it?" "It's not like I'm leaving you," she added, her tone devoid of any remorse, her decision already sealed. And something deep down told me that by the end of this night, her smirk would be replaced by a very different expression. There she stood again, posing in front of the mirror as if nothing had happened. A woman in the dress I had once adored, now casually dismantling the foundation of our marriage with a few careless words and an indifferent shrug. Instead of igniting a fire of anger in me, I felt an eerie calm settle in its place. My mind sharper now than it had been in years. I'd always trusted her. Never the type to snoop through her phone or interrogate her every move. That trust had been unshakable until tonight. Grace turned back to me, clearly annoyed by my lack of reaction. "What?" she snapped, shifting her purse to the other shoulder. "You're acting weird. Weird, Nathan." I couldn't help but let out a dry, humorless laugh and, steadying my voice, asked, "How long?" for the umpteenth time that night. She blinked as if puzzled. "How long what?" I pressed on, holding her gaze with a slow, measured tone that stretched the silence between us. "How long has this been going on?" Her eyes rolled in exasperation, as if I were asking something as trivial as tonight's dinner. "Don't be like that," she said dismissively. "It's not a big deal. Not a big deal." Those words echoed in my mind until I found myself questioning whether I'd heard correctly. My hand tightened around the back of a chair. "Not a big deal. You walk out that door to meet another man, letting him hold you the way I do, and that's not a big deal?" For a split second I saw a crack in her mask, a brief flash of guilt hidden deep beneath layers of cool detachment. But just as quickly, she smoothed it away, her confident demeanor returning. "I'm not saying it isn't important," she replied coolly. "I'm just saying this is life. People change. Relationships evolve. And honestly, you should be grateful I'm being upfront about it." I studied her, noting that she looked at me not with regret, but with a detached air, as if our long years together had become little more than a formality. It was then I realized she'd been preparing for this moment. Perhaps not right then, but the moment when truth would no longer be hidden behind polite facades. I took a slow step forward, my voice soft but resolute. "You're not the woman I married." Her smirk broadened, as though she had been waiting merely for that confirmation. "Of course not," she replied lightly, even amusingly. "People change. I've changed. Maybe you should too." It was as if she were talking to a stranger, suggesting that my reaction was somehow misplaced. I exhaled slowly and, locking eyes with her, asked, "And what exactly do you expect me to do with this information, Grace?" Lifting an eyebrow, she replied as if the answer were blindingly obvious. "I expect you to accept it." Taking another step toward the door, she checked her watch like it were just another appointment on an already busy schedule. Her mind was made up, and suddenly so was mine. I straightened, my posture turning rigid as I said simply, "Go." That small command caught her off guard. Her head tilted, lips parting in a feigned surprise. "You're okay with this?" she queried. I gave her a small, unexpected smile, one she wasn't used to, one that spoke of a new inner strength. "Yeah," I admitted, "but you already made your choice. Now it's my turn." For the first time that night, her hand twitched hesitantly at her side. I saw nervousness there, and that was enough for me. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door, leaving behind a silence so thick it nearly choked me. I remained motionless, my thoughts racing faster than ever. Grace believed she had control, but she had no idea what was coming next. The silence that followed was tangible, as though the very walls of the house absorbed every heavy note of betrayal. I looked around and saw nothing had changed. The home we'd built together, the photos lining the walls, even the lingering trace of her perfume. And yet nothing was as it once was. I sank into the dining chair, massaging my temples as questions whirled in my head. How long had she been planning this? How long had I lived in blissful ignorance, thinking we were an ordinary married couple weathering life's ups and downs? Had she been seeing this other man for weeks, months, or even years? I longed to feel the explosive anger of a man betrayed, to be so furious that I might shatter a wall. But instead, a clarity unlike any I'd felt before settled in my soul. She had made her choice, and for the first time, I realized I had a choice of my own. Most men in my shoes would have flown into a rage, demanded answers, even stirred up a scene. Grace expected that reaction, a desperate outburst proving she'd broken me. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I reached for my phone, not to call her, but for someone else. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Hey, it's me," I said when the line picked up. After a pause, a familiar voice answered on the other end. It was Henry, my brother, the one who had built his own life out of state while I sunk deeper into routine. "I need a favor," I said bluntly. Another pause followed before he asked, "What kind of favor?" Gripping the phone tighter, I admitted, "I just need to get out of here for a while." "You okay?" he inquired gently. I wasn't sure, but I didn't feel like recounting every painful detail over the phone. After a long silence, he said, "Come on over." I hung up, grabbed my keys, and stepped out the door without even locking it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't certain I'd be coming back. The drive to Henry's place felt longer than I remembered. Each mile was filled with my own raw reflections. Grace was never one to settle for an ordinary life. Her constant craving for excitement, for adventure, for attention might have been something I'd overlooked. Perhaps I had convinced myself I was enough for her, when clearly I wasn't. By the time I pulled into Henry's driveway, my mind was resolute. I wasn't going to chase after her or fight for a woman who had already left me behind in her mind. Instead, I was prepared to do something she'd never anticipate. I was going to let her go, and somehow I knew she'd regret it far more than I ever would. I sat in the car for a few long moments before knocking on Henry's door. The engine's low hum was the only sound on the quiet street, and although I should have been home watching a late-night show with Grace or settling in for a quiet night in, I was here instead. Taking a deep breath and tightening my grip on the steering wheel, I resisted the urge to turn back. Deep down, I realized exactly what Grace wanted, to leave me feeling helpless. But she was mistaken. I wasn't a lost puppy waiting for her return. I was no longer going to crumble under the weight of her choices. Henry answered the door wearing a hoodie and sweatpants, his expression saying, "You've just emerged from another planet." "Well, this is unexpected," he remarked, stepping aside to let me in. I took in the familiar surroundings, the worn leather couch, the neat stack of books on the coffee table, and the distinct aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air. Though it had been over a year since I last visited, nothing seemed to have changed. Henry shut the door behind us and stared at me. "All right, what's going on?" he asked. Sighing deeply, I ran a hand through my hair and said, "Grace is cheating on me." Those words felt unreal, as if uttered by someone else. Henry's face darkened. "Are you sure?" he pressed. I let out a bitter laugh. "She told me herself," I replied, my voice edged with a mocking tone. "She put on a dress, smirked, and said she was off on a date. No shame, no hesitation." Henry let out a low whistle. "Wow, that's rough." After a few moments of silence, Henry finally asked, "So what now?" I had been waiting for that question, the moment when everything could shift. Betrayal, I realized, left you hollow. The choices then boiled down to either wallow as a victim or grab the reins of your own destiny. Leaning forward, I met Henry's steady gaze. "I'm not chasing her. I'm not going to beg or fight. I'm done." Henry raised an eyebrow in disbelief. "Just like that?" I simply shrugged. "What's the alternative? To wait around hoping she'll come back, trying to win her over while she's off with someone else?" Henry nodded slowly. "You're right. She doesn't deserve that." Even amid my newfound liberation, I couldn't escape the weight of her casual cruelty. Nothing about this betrayal, the effortless way she had dismissed our life together, felt accidental. It was calculated. She had been pulling away for months, and tonight it all came crashing down. Her confident facade had masked months of deliberate planning. Then, just as my phone buzzed, I glanced at the screen and saw her name. Henry leaned forward. "Are you going to answer that?" I hesitated for a long moment before swiping to open the message. "Hey, don't wait up. I might be late." I couldn't help but let out an actual laugh, bitter and short, because she still believed she was in control. Henry peered at the screen. "She's really all in, huh?" I slid the phone back into my pocket. Little did she know that by the time she stepped back through our door, nothing would be the same again. Tonight, I didn't sleep, not because I was consumed by rage, sadness, or heartbreak, but because my mind was busy strategizing my next moves. By dawn, while Henry's guest room was illuminated by the soft morning light, I had already mapped out my plan. Grace had spent months building her plan, convinced she held all the power, but what she hadn't foreseen was that for the very first time, I was pulling the strings. That morning, I made the call that would change everything. I called a lawyer, one of the best, whose reputation alone could intimidate the devil. His name was Ron Jeremy, and as he leafed through the folder I brought, he said coolly, "Your wife is having an affair, and she expects you to just sit here?" I replied evenly, "Seems like it." Ron smirked. "People like her always think they're untouchable until they're not." I already liked him. I laid it all out for Ron, the way Grace had nonchalantly mentioned her date, the slow emotional withdrawal over the past months, the arrogance, the sheer absence of remorse. Ron listened intently, nodding occasionally. After a long pause, he leaned back. "This can work in your favor. You haven't confronted her yet, so she still thinks she holds the upper hand. That's good. Let her believe it, until it's too late." I exhaled deeply, feeling tension drain from my body. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was acting. That evening I returned home, expecting the familiar surroundings to feel different, to echo the night's events. Instead, the house was exactly as it had always been. She was the one who had changed. As I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me, the air was thick with her lingering perfume, a haunting reminder of the night she'd left to be with someone else. I moved through every room looking at the framed memories, the neatly arranged bookshelves, and even the half-empty coffee mug left untouched from that morning. And then I heard it, the jingle of her key entering the lock. Grace stepped back inside and casually tossed her purse onto the counter, as if nothing unnatural had occurred. When her eyes met mine, she hesitated. "Oh, you're home," she said, feigning surprise. Without missing a beat, I leaned against the kitchen island and asked, "So, how was your date?" A flicker of something crossed her face, a brief flash of doubt quickly masked by a saccharine smile. "Great. Thanks for asking," she replied. I nodded impassively and gestured toward the dining table, where a neat stack of papers awaited. Her eyes followed my hand, and as soon as she saw them, her signature smirk slipped away. "What's this?" she asked slowly. I didn't answer immediately. I wanted her to sit with the weight of the moment, to feel as if the walls were closing in. Finally, I stated softly, "Divorce papers. I figured I'd save you the trouble." Her eyes widened in disbelief. So that's it? You're just done? She asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. I pretended to ponder it for a split second before smiling. Yep. Her face went pale as I saw, for the first time, a sliver of panic, a reaction that betrayed her absolute certainty that I would be begging, pleading for her to stay. But that day, I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. Without a word, I turned and walked toward the stairs, my footsteps echoing through the silence of our once shared home. I didn't even glance back. All I felt was a heavy sense of liberation. She had expected a broken man scrambling for answers, but instead, I had chosen to reclaim my life. Even as she lingered downstairs, perhaps trying to salvage some sense of control, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my messages until I found Ron's name. Our earlier conversation flashed on the screen. Make sure she doesn't suspect a thing until everything is finalized. A small smirk tugged at the corner of my lips. She hadn't suspected a thing. A series of knocks at the door eventually interrupted the silence. I ignored them until her voice, desperate and hesitant, filtered through. Nathan? I closed my eyes briefly. She always used my full name when she needed something. What? I replied flatly. Another pause followed before she added, Can we talk? I exhaled slowly, shaking my head, even though she couldn't see it. Talk? I repeated with a hint of disbelief. I had already given every opportunity to communicate, to be honest about our lives. Instead, she had chosen humiliation, treating me like an afterthought in my own marriage. Now finally, she wanted a conversation, on my terms. I rose from the couch, unlocked the door, but instead of opening it, I waited. When the door cracked open a bit further, she pushed her way inside. I saw her face. It now looked uncertain, stripped of its earlier arrogance. Folded arms and a tilted head showed she was desperately trying to regain control. So, you're just ending things? She asked. I met her gaze steadily. Yeah, I replied. In that moment, she tried to gauge if I would explode, cry, or beg, and she never expected the calm response. Come on, Nathan, she pleaded. This is ridiculous. I almost laughed. Ridiculous? You just walked out like you owned it, parading your date in front of me, and now you call this ridiculous? I crossed my arms. What exactly do you think is ridiculous? That I'm not begging for you to stay? Her eyes softened for a moment as she struggled for words. I thought we had an understanding, she murmured after a long beat. An understanding? I repeated, arching an eyebrow. She sighed, exasperated. Marriage isn't a fairy tale, Nathan. It's messy and ever-changing. So you believe that means I should just sit back while you go out and have fun? I countered dryly. That I should accept you dating other people like some loyal pet? Her face tensed. That's not what I meant, she tried to explain. It's exactly what you meant. Frustration flashed across her face, and for a split second, the carefully built mask of confidence cracked. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she muttered. I took a slow step forward, lowering my voice so only she could hear. No, Grace, I said firmly. You made it harder the moment you decided I wasn't worth the truth. Her jaw clenched. So what now? We just throw away everything we built? I tilted my head. You already did. She flinched. I could see the first signs of fear, and that confirmed it. She had underestimated me. With a heavy sigh, I stated, The divorce is happening. My voice was even and unyielding. If you want to act shocked, fine. But don't stand here pretending you didn't choose this. The silence between us grew thick, until finally she turned on her heel and walked away. I didn't watch her leave. I just knew I was done fighting for a love that had long since faded. As the seconds passed, the weight of our shared history bore down on me. A past filled with familiar items, cherished photos, carefully arranged books, and the lingering ghost of her perfume. I moved to the window and drew back the curtain to reveal the quiet street. Streetlights casting long shadows like the remnants of a broken dream. And then I heard her voice, now softer and smaller, as if she was trying to convince herself something. Peeking through the slightly ajar door, I heard her whisper into a phone. I don't know. He's not reacting the way I expected. My spine stiffened with a cold, sharp twist. Who was she calling? And why did apprehension lace her tone? She sighed in frustration. No, I didn't think he'd be happy about it. He just agreed, she continued, voice wavering. A pause followed, then almost timidly, what if I miscalculated? I nearly laughed. Miscalculation was the first clear thought she had all night. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, letting her conversation unfold. The longer I listened, the more I realized that this wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was a game, a dangerous chess match where she assumed she was the only player. I stepped back, exhaling slowly, my pulse steady and my clarity unshaken. If she had a plan, it was time I made one of my own. Over the next few days, I silently watched how Grace navigated the aftermath of her choices. Her furtive glances at her phone, hesitant words caught before they could be spoken, and the increasing time she spent away from home. It was as though she was waiting for me to break, to deliver the performance of a desperate, heartbroken husband. But I gave her nothing. I remained calm, so calm that it began to unsettle her. And on the fourth day, I set the final piece in motion. I waited until she was out, then made a few calls. I met with Ron again to finalize the divorce details, ensuring that every asset, every piece of evidence was meticulously documented, everything formatted to leave her with nothing. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my keys on the counter and a single glass of whiskey penned in front of me. The front door opened, and as Grace stepped in, her eyes widened at the sight of me. There it was again, the hesitation, the uncertainty. I gestured for her to sit across from me. Her jaw tightened, but she did as I asked. I watched her carefully, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way her fingers fidgeted against the table. She was waiting for a reaction, for some sign that I was still the man she once knew. But she would find I had no more to give. Sliding a folder towards her, I said calmly, "Open it." After a pregnant pause, she flipped through the papers, and I saw her entire body go rigid. "You've been planning this," I stated, leaning back casually. I figured I should have a plan of my own. Her throat convulsed and she swallowed hard as she realized what was laid out before her. "Divorce papers," I said even more softly, "finalized and drafted in my favor." Her eyes widened further. Fear, not sorrow or rage, danced there for a moment. She had expected me to crumble, to beg for reconciliation. Instead, I calmly informed her, "I just care that you get the hell out of my house." "Nathan, this was your choice," she murmured weakly. "You said you wanted freedom." "And now you have it," I countered, voice cold and resolute. "You wanted to date other people? Congratulations, but not here." Her eyes searched mine, but I saw only the steadiness of a man who had reclaimed his life. In that charged moment, I felt compelled to remind everyone watching that sometimes the hardest choices lead to unexpected freedom. If you find stories like this resonate with you, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback means the world to us. She blinked rapidly, her fists curling in a mix of anger and desperation. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "I thought you'd fight, that you'd be so broken you wouldn't even see what was coming." I tilted my head slightly and responded, "You thought I was weak. You thought you'd designed the perfect script for my downfall." A heavy silence followed before she exhaled a shaky laugh, bitter and devoid of mirth. "I guess I did." I stood, grabbing my keys and coldly declaring, "Pack your things. You're leaving tonight." Without a word, she nodded, her gaze fixed on the divorce papers as if trying to comprehend the shattering end of our once shared life. She had played herself, believing she held all the power, but in the end, I had taken control. And as I stepped out the door, I couldn't help but wonder, was I really letting go of the man who had once meant everything to me? Absolutely not. I knew that if I allowed this man who stole my wife to walk away unpunished, I'd be condemning myself to a lifetime of regret. Inside Ron's dimly lit office a few days later, I leaned forward over his desk, my voice barely a whisper. "I need to know who he is." Ron, ever calm and collected, smiled thinly and said, "I figured you'd ask. Give me a few days." When I pressed for more details, he simply added, "We'll talk once you have his name." 3 days later, I returned to his office. Ron lit his cigar, took a slow puff, and slid a folder towards me. "John Wayne," he stated matter-of-factly. I flipped through the folder and saw a sharply dressed man in his late 30s, his hair slicked back, and an expression that screamed untouchable arrogance. Where does he work? I asked. A finance firm downtown, Ron replied. He's a senior analyst. And get this, he's married with 2 kids. I let out a low chuckle. So he wrecks homes for sport. Ron exhaled smoke and leaned back. Looks like it. And if you want a message sent, I can make sure he knows exactly what it means to mess with a man who's had enough. I met his gaze and, reaching into my jacket, pulled out a check. Make it hurt, I said. Ron smirked, tucking the check away as if sealing our pact. 2 days later, news arrived that John had been violently jumped outside his office just as he was leaving for his car, his wallet, watch, and personal belongings targeted in a message he'd soon regret. Grace fought the divorce in court for 7 grueling months, accusing me of infidelity, arguing over assets, even demanding spousal support. But Ron tore through her claims like a predator feasting on weak prey. Every hidden secret, every lie and manipulation was laid bare. When the judge finally ruled in my favor, I secured the house, the assets, and every remnant of a life we once shared. Grace left town soon after, rumored to have fled to Chicago for a fresh start, and I finally felt free. For the first time in years, I felt that exhilarating rush of liberation. I want to take a moment to thank you for listening, and if you're finding this story compelling, please consider liking this video, commenting your thoughts, and subscribing to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you riveted. As I prepared to move on, I recalled that night when Grace had casually announced her plans. I'm off on a date. Try not to be too jealous. The same sentence echoed in my head like a broken record, each repetition weighing heavier on my chest. I wandered through our home, the familiar photos, the lingering scent of her perfume, the untouched coffee mug from that morning, and I realized nothing was ever the same. How long had she been planning this? How long had I been basking in naive bliss, assuming we were just another couple facing life's ups and downs? Had the affair been weeks, months, or even years in the making? I longed to feel the righteous anger that would make me smash something to pieces, but instead, I felt an unexpected clarity. She had chosen her path, and now I had my own. I wasn't going to be the husband who pleaded for someone who had already checked out. I trusted no longer. I trusted only the newfound strength inside me. That night, as I lay awake, each thought was a calculated move. I realized that Grace had meticulously orchestrated this moment. Every lie, every casual dismissal. It was all measured to strip me of my power. But now I was the one holding all the cards. And as the first light of dawn crept through the blinds of Henry's guest room, I made a decision. I was going to close the door on our past and ensure that Grace realized just how costly her choices had been. Later, when I returned to our house, everything felt unnervingly the same, yet entirely different. The lingering scent of her perfume and the impeccably arranged decor only served as mournful reminders that I was now dealing with a stranger, a woman who had no allegiance to the vows we shared. She stepped in, tossing her purse aside, feigning nonchalance, only to be instantly met by the reality of my calm defiance. "Oh, you're home," she said, clearly not expecting my return. With a casual lean against the kitchen island, I asked, "So, how was your date?" Her face displayed a fleeting flicker of uncertainty before she forced a sweet smile. I gestured to the dining table, where a neat stack of papers awaited. Her eyes fell upon them, and in that moment, her familiar smirk vanished. "What's this?" she whispered. I let the silence hang heavy before softly replying, "Divorce papers." As the gravity of that moment sank in, I knew the power in our relationship had definitively shifted. Her reaction was a cocktail of disbelief and dawning panic, the very reaction she had counted on, but never achieved. I turned and headed for the stairs without a backward glance, leaving behind the remnants of a marriage that had long since dissolved. Every step echoed in the silence. Each step affirmed that I was no longer the man who would beg for love that had already deserted him. In the quiet aftermath, I retreated to our bedroom, locked the door not out of fear, but to preserve the finality of my choice. I sat on the edge of the bed, a slow exhale punctuating the end of an era. Downstairs, I heard her moving, faint sounds of someone grappling with the reality of losing everything she once took for granted. Even as she attempted to spin her narrative of victimhood, the power had clearly shifted. She had orchestrated her own downfall, while I reclaimed control over my life. I picked up my phone and reviewed Ron's earlier message. Make sure she doesn't suspect a thing until everything is finalized. A sly smile crept over my face. She was none the wiser. And for 3 long days, I let her stew in that tense, oppressive silence. Then on the 4th day, I set the final gears of my plan into motion. With methodical precision and without remorse, I made the necessary calls and met with Ron one final time. The divorce was molded to leave nothing in her favor. The house, the assets, every piece of evidence of her betrayal had been meticulously secured. She'd walked straight into her own trap. That evening, as I sat alone at my kitchen table with my keys and a single glass of whiskey in front of me, I prepared myself for her inevitable return. When the front door opened and Grace stepped in, there was hesitation in her step, a nervous twitch in her aura. I gestured to the empty seat across from me. She obeyed silently, her eyes fixed on the folder I slid over. "What's this?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Open it," I urged gently. As she flipped through the papers, her entire world seemed to pause. I leaned forward and said calmly, "You've been planning this all along. I just wanted to be ready, with my own plan." The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the sound of her rapid breathing. When she finally managed a shaky laugh, it was devoid of humor, a bitter acknowledgement of the irreversible change. "I guess I did," she admitted quietly. Standing up and grabbing my keys, I issued my final command in a voice that brooked no argument. "Pack your things. You're leaving tonight." There was no pleading, no tears, just a stunned silence as she nodded and began to gather her belongings. Before I left, I stepped into Ron's office one last time to ensure that even the man who had so arrogantly trespassed into my life would face the consequences. Ron's network had worked swiftly and fiercely. Just days later, John Wayne was left bruised and broken after an assault that sent a clear message. And while Grace fought the battle in court for months, Ron's precise dismantling of her claims left her with nothing. The judge ruled in my favor. The house, the assets, every remnant of our shared past was mine. Grace, stripped of her power and pride, eventually left town, rumored to have moved to Chicago in search of a fresh start. But I was unmoved. I had found freedom. Now as I stand here, I feel an unexpected lightness, a liberation that comes from reclaiming your life from the hands of someone who once held power over you. And to you listening, if you appreciate this unapologetic journey of finding strength in betrayal, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. Your support fuels our storytelling. As I walked back out that day into the quiet house that once felt like our home, I realized she had expected me to fight for her, the desperate, broken husband, the one who would relentlessly plead for reconciliation. Instead, I chose to let go. Outside, I drew back the curtain and looked out at a street bathed in the soft glow of fading streetlights, shadows long and haunting. I could still hear her voice echoing, the same mocking words from that fateful evening. "I'm off on a date. Try not to be too jealous." Each repetition tightened the weight in my chest until finally I sank into the truth. I had made my choice. In that final moment of confrontation, as I heard her half-whispered worries over the phone, her fear emerging through tentative words, I realized that she had underestimated me at every turn. I wasn't the heartbroken man she expected to unravel. I was calm. I was calculating. I was free. And as I gathered my strength to make my final move, I knew that the trap she set for me was about to close in on itself. For days I had watched her closely, her furtive glances at her phone, her lingering hesitations, and every small tremor of doubt. She had orchestrated everything, expecting me to crumble. Instead, I let her stew in that silence until I had every move planned out. Then on the 4th day, I made the decisive call. The final act of this dramatic turning point began with me dialing Ron, finalizing every detail in my favor. Every asset, every memory, every sign of her betrayal was now mine by right. That evening, when Grace finally returned home, she found not the desperate, pleading husband she had always known, but a man resolute and in control. I watched her sit down, her hands trembling as she stared fixedly at the divorce papers. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, a stark contrast to the confident smirk of earlier. I said it plainly, "This is it. Divorce. Finalized in my favor." I don't care about your excuses or your so-called plans. Just leave. Her anger, her pleading, even her attempts to spin our past into something redeemable, all fell flat. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and declared one final time, "Pack your things. You're leaving tonight." And as she silently nodded and began to gather herself, I turned away, leaving behind everything that once was. Before I could fully walk out the door, I stepped into a final quiet moment with Ron by phone, ensuring that everyone would understand the consequences of crossing boundaries. Ron had made sure that even John Wayne, the man she'd been unfaithful with, would learn that some lines should never be crossed. The incident outside his office was the final message. No one messes with another man's life and escapes unscathed. In the end, I walked out of that house a free man, leaving behind the betrayal, the lies, and the world that had once been our marriage. And I want you to know that sometimes letting go is the most powerful move you can make. Thank you for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and transformation. The door closed behind me with a final, definitive click, sealing the end of our marriage. I moved upstairs slowly, each step echoing with the sound of a life reborn. In my quiet room, I sat by the window, watching streetlights cast long, dramatic shadows across the pavement. Everything looked as it always did on the surface. Yet inside, my world had irrevocably changed. Though I heard her tentative voice on the phone, whispered doubts, murmurs of regret, I realized that she was now left with nothing but the echo of her own choices. I listened, letting the conversation play out as proof that she had miscalculated. Calm and collected, I was already constructing my future, while she clung to the wreckage of the past. As the night deepened, I picked up my phone one final time and sent the message that would mark the end of our shared chapter. In that moment, I knew that I wasn't letting her steer the narrative any longer. I was the one in control. And so, with each carefully measured step, I began building a future that was solely mine. A future where betrayal was met not with tears or rage, but with the cool satisfaction of a man who refused to be defined by another's selfish choices. This is the story of how I reclaimed my life, from betrayal to liberation, and I hope it inspires you to take charge of your own destiny, no matter how the cards are dealt. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more journeys of unexpected strength and transformation. Thank you for listening.